Coming to you from the Hudson Media Group studio, this is Talking Politics, and I am New Jersey's premier journalist and top 100 Latino via the Latino Spirit Online magazine, Fernando Uribe. Hope you're all doing well, and certainly as we approach the 245th birthday of our great country, there is a lot to discuss, so let's get started. Here's what I'm thinking about right now. Ladies and gentlemen, I've talked about it before, and certainly it bears repeating that leftists in New Jersey continue to be a nuisance, and here's just one more example. Now, this past week, for any of you that are familiar with the New Jersey Turnpike and the Grover-Cleveland service area right near Woodbridge, the usual leftist and social justice clowns and woke fools decided to block traffic because they wanted to raise awareness about how illegals aren't getting enough money in the recent state budget per Governor Murphy. So let me just give you some details here to sort of unravel why this is sort of nonsense, and of course, these protesters continue to be an absolute nuisance. So, according to various news outlets this week, right around the 5 o'clock rush hour, a group called Y Nosotros Que demonstrated again at the Grover-Cleveland service area, demanding far more money in pandemic relief for illegals than the $40 million that originally was promised by Governor Murphy. Now, they want $1 billion. Yes, folks, billion with a B. And they're willing to break the law to get it. And obviously, this is one of the things that absolutely disgusts me about people on the left is, they love to sort of have their tantrums because if they don't get their way, well, they'll just demonstrate and protest and break laws because that's all they know how to do. They can't really convey a message along policy lines, so why not just act like incensed children who, for some reason, didn't get that extra scoop of ice cream after dinner. Now, of course, they left the rest area, and according to various news outlets, dozens of cars took to the turnpike itself, and drivers got out of their vehicles and held up signs across the roadway and brought traffic during rush hour to a grinding halt. Now, this went on for apparently almost 10 minutes, and apparently by the time the state police arrived, the group was already dispersing, but traffic was already well backed up for almost half an hour. Now, of course, as we've learned more about it, one of the signs read, we, the workers, demand $1 billion. Another read, recovery for all, not just for a few. Now, folks, this is the thing, demand. So let that sink in, okay? Because they demand. So in what sort of alternate reality can people sort of sneak into a country, right, violate immigration laws, and then demand something? Like, that only happens here in the United States, unfortunately. Now, the majority of illegals in New Jersey are not even paying federal income tax. That's a fact, folks. Okay, that's not conjecture. That's not me being xenophobic or anti-immigrant. I'm the son of immigrants. So stop with your nonsense if you think I'm sort of espousing that rhetoric. Okay, and of course, these organizations are now going to make demands on their part. To the vast majority of the illegals in New Jersey, I say this. You know what? You don't care enough about your citizenship status because you don't care about being part of this nation. That's it. Citizenship is a two-way street, folks. Okay? Now, citizenship bestows certain rights, but it also bestows certain responsibilities. It's that simple. For example, serving on a jury, fighting for your country when called upon if you decide to enlist in the armed forces, and not cutting and running when the economy gets bad, for example. Now, why do I say that last part? Well, of course, folks, a telltale sign that most illegals don't care about the nation is that during what's now been called the Great Recession of 2008 and also 2009, illegal immigration practically stopped. So, again, let me just give you a little bit more of a context here. So when there was no money to be made, which is what most of the illegals only care about, they suddenly had no interest, right? So, of course, they weren't interested in the American way of life. They were not interested in freedom. So, I don't know about you, but my patience is over because the audacity of these individuals, and folks, what makes it worse is these leftist activist groups, right? Whether it's Make the Road New Jersey, whether it's insufferable people like Amy Torres, who's the executive director of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice, all these other bleeding heart groups, right? But the problem is you're demanding $1 billion from a country you don't belong to, okay? So it wasn't enough that many illegals receive public assistance. It's not enough that, enough school districts in New Jersey don't bother asking your questions about your illegal children, right, who either you brought across the border or you have them here, right? And of course, in our school districts, per the United States Supreme Court, they're required to teach them and of course to educate them at the expense of taxpayer dollars. So it wasn't enough that as these kids of illegals or even the illegal kids in general, when they're old enough that they receive in-state tuition, of course, under the liberal policies of Phil Murphy and, of course, Democrats who love to cater to illegals. So it wasn't enough that, you know what, hey, listen, let's give illegals driver's licenses. You know, now you want $1 billion. Folks, this is the problem with the left in New Jersey. Nothing ever satisfies them. And you know what? I was watching Real Time with Bill Maher last week, and there are a lot of things I agree with Bill Maher about. Actually, there are two things: political correctness and his dislike for Islam. So those are things that I can sort of get behind. But the third thing that he's usually right on lately is the fact that leftists will never be satisfied. And this is just another example. Folks, we coddle illegals in this state like a woman at a local park ripping out her breasts and just breastfeeding, okay? That's exactly what Democrats and people on the left in New Jersey love to do. They don't care about citizens like me, my parents, or anybody else. They don't care about taxpayers. They care about coddling illegals. Again, just rip out one of the breasts and just start breastfeeding. That's what the legislature in Trenton loves to do, and this governor as well. Because it's not enough that we have to give all these things I've just listed to illegals, but now we need to give them more. The audacity of people who don't deserve to be here anyway because they're here illegally now want $1 billion. And of course, what makes it worse, especially, you have all these white woke folks that represent these organizations. There's nothing more sickening that, the typical macchiato sipping, cappuccino drinking, white woke person having to, advocate for illegals. There's nothing more sickening than that. Well, a few other things. But the fact is, folks, that now we're enabling this. And you know what? It reminds me of the fact that when we've seen protesters trying to stop traffic in other states, I got to tell you something. For a lot of the reputation that New Jerseyans may have about being all big and bad and tough, you know what? If I was one of those people on the turnpike, I don't know what I would have done if I was in a rush, but let me tell you something. That's a public safety hazard. You don't know if an emergency vehicle is trying to get through. You don't know if someone's trying to get home because maybe their sitter is about to leave. There's a plethora of other things that could come up in dynamics. But these idiots don't think about that. All they care about is being woke and, again, being down with the cause and saying si se puede and ya tu sabe and, all these other Hispanic groups. And I'm Hispanic, folks. But it's these Hispanic groups that are absolutely just nauseating to me because all they do is stick up for illegality because that's what they're doing. And when I see protesters blocking highways, it's a shame that here in New Jersey, just like in New York, we have spineless governors, just like we do in Connecticut, just like we do in Minnesota, in Michigan, and California. But you know who gets it right? Red governors like Ron DeSantis in Florida and Greg Abbott in Texas. If you block traffic, there's going to be legislation that's going to hold you personally responsible. And if someone decides to run you over, you know what, folks, I'll say this, I don't care how it sounds, but I remember last summer when I saw all these BLM protests, right, standing up for a career criminal like George Floyd, or being outraged about Breonna Taylor, because let's be honest, it was her taste in men that got her killed. Yeah, I get it. It was, no knock warrants that sometimes, get scrutinized, but it was her taste in men that got her killed. But of course, all we did was spend last summer watching the news, watching BLM protesters, watching Antifa burn down cities and blocking traffic. And when people took it upon themselves to sort of barrel through them, I don't know about you, but I actually got a really good amount of satisfaction watching people run over protesters. I know you're going to say that sounds awful, that's sick, that's sociopathic. It's none of those things, folks. It makes me care as an American that we shouldn't be rewarding people for breaking the law. And if you're going to be stupid and play stupid games, then you win stupid prizes. And I'll tell you right now, if you ever want to get a good laugh, watch some of these videos when it comes to people just running over protesters. It's pretty funny. I mean, whether it's like they're being tossed up in the air or just splat right on the ground. I don't know about you folks, that brings me a certain type of satisfaction. And if somebody in New Jersey this past week had done that on the turnpike, I wouldn't have lost sleep about it, because you know what? When these people decide to endanger drivers and create a public safety hazard, I lose all respect for you. And I'll be honest with you, I lose all humanity for you. But again, let's get back to not just the nuisance of the protesters, but what they stand for. Again, they just want to coddle illegals each and every day. And the problem is that leftists, the social justice clowns, woke fools, the compassion mongers, and of course, the illegal coddlers all love to do that. For whatever reason, they like to think of them and not citizens. And I don't know about you, I'm pretty sick of it. And that's what I'm thinking about right now. On this week's edition of the 5-time award-winning podcast, Talking the Hudson, which you can listen to live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/talkingthehudson, was my regularly scheduled monthly guest, the distinguished chairwoman of the HCDO, and currently a council candidate for an at-large seat in Jersey City, Amy DeGise. We spoke for an hour on a plethora of very different issues, and here's some highlights for your consideration. I asked her about the new candidacy of Lewis Spears, who apparently is a lifelong community activist in Jersey City and now has decided to challenge Mayor Stephen Fulop coming up on November 2nd, as Stephen Fulop himself decides to try to win a third term as the mayor of Hudson County's largest city. Let's hear what Amy had to say about it.
Maybe let's get to it here. Obviously, it's July 1st is already tomorrow. Campaign season is well underway here, not just in New Jersey. Obviously, we have a gubernatorial election. We have legislative seats, but in Hudson County, we have not just only a municipal election in November, but also in Jersey City. You're also a council candidate for an at-large seat. We'll talk about that in a moment.
Yep.
But obviously reported a couple of weeks ago, it's my understanding he submitted all the necessary signatures. I believe he'll be on the ballot. But a lot of people were surprised it took this long for the mayor to have an opponent. It seems to be that it's going to be Lewis Spears, a community activist.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are just sort of surprised it took this long for him to get on the ballot. What's the perception within the campaign, Amy, if you're at liberty to sort of talk about it? Because it seems that maybe this candidacy is just sort of like a protest vote against the mayor. I mean, you get started this late in the game, you have to believe you haven't mobilized enough time and people to sort of get a real concerted campaign going. Is that what's working against Mr. Spears?
Yeah, that's possible. And I will say I think he is known in pockets throughout the city. Not just in the neighborhood where he's from. For some people, I think you take a risk. Like, what do you have to lose? Because if you lose an election, that does not mean that you lose your job, your life, the people who love you. But it gives you an opportunity to bond with more of the community, get your name out there, and maybe give yourself a better shot for the next time around, which might be his angle now, because I don't think that he's announced running with a slate or major fundraisers. So he may be just doing this to test the waters and see how it feels. But I do think that some people will run just as a protest to the administration. I don't really think that Lewis is doing it in that case, but you'll have other people that will come out just to kind of raise some concerns and just be on the opposing side of what the city is doing.
Secondly, we discussed the amount of progressive candidates that were trying to run for committee seats within the Hudson County Democratic Organization. Amy had a lot to say about, again, the bubble that many of them live in and ultimately the impact that they're having on the Democratic Party in Hudson County. Let's hear what she had to say about it.
I wanted to pick your brain about this. Again, let's get to some county business now. You are the chair of the HCDO, and it's my understanding that, again, a guy that's running for re-election in Ward E, Councilman James Solomon, seems to be sort of, kind of dancing in the end zone a little bit with the fact that he was able, I guess through his name and his push, to get some committee people elected recently, some progressives. I like to call them regressives sometimes, and some of these people kind of make you scratch your head at me. But it seems like Solomon's kind of dancing in the end zone a little bit. He was able to get some committee people on there. Maybe not the numbers he would have liked, but, he seemed fairly happy when he did his kickoff for re-election event at Hamilton Park, sort of, really conveying the point about progressive politics and progressive candidates. And, my big issue with James, aside from the fact that he told me bluntly he will not come on this show again, is the fact that I think he kind of focuses too much on national issues and doesn't focus enough on, I think, local Jersey City issues. I get it. He wants to be that AOC darling in a sense. But, I mean, what were your thoughts about some committee seats going to progressive candidates?
Yeah, and I have, a lot of thoughts on that. But I'll start, I definitely agree that I think that a lot of his recent politics is more national than local. And that might be a message that his community responds to and likes. But again, it's not really connecting what your day job is and creating policy and legislation. And I think it then kind of spurred some misinformation and miscommunication, because you will have, examples of committee people running on platforms that they really can't do as a committee person. And not just because the bylaws say it and you could change those bylaws, but because that's, not a function of a committee person, it's a function of a council person. The line that ran for the Hudson County Progressive Alliance for commissioner or freeholders, they ran on things that freeholders don't do and commissioners don't do. So I think that, people like to hear these things and they think, wow, we're like-minded and, I agree with that. But if you really can't perform that function at your job, why would you offer that as your campaign platform point? So that's like me as an educator talking from, a superintendent's perspective. I may have ideas and I may be able to say what's the best practice or what's good or bad, but I'm not in that position. So I, shouldn't be bragging about those things or using them as my platform point if that's not what I can actually do. And, in regards, they ran a really competitive races, but most of it, 75% were in Ward E. They were in the, and I say this kindly, in the bubble that a lot of them live in. They're surrounded by people who are like them, who think like them and have, similar ideals. So a lot of them that won were already committee people. So they were the incumbents who maintained their seat. And some of those people chose to run with the HCDO 2 years ago and then chose not to this time, which is, why they think they had so many gains. But it's typical for incumbents to win. They didn't have a single candidate run in A or F. We did have one opposing district in F, but it was not from their alliance. They had maybe a handful in D, C, and B. So they're mainly in one area, and they won a few against our incumbents, which if our line candidates won and then the committee person lost. I love using that as the argument when they say get rid of the line, people are going to vote the line. No, voters vote how they want to, and that is apparent when you see that happen. So they were successful in places that they were already successful, but they didn't make any gains. And to have no candidates in two wards, especially wards that are predominantly people of color, that's alarming. It shows that they don't have a very good perception of how the rest of the city feels about, their politics and that their outreach is maybe lacking on that point, that they need to talk to the community instead of telling the community about how they feel. So, I'm proud of them, and I know that a lot of the people who ran on that under that slogan, I don't want to call it a line because they don't like to use that term, I think that they're going to work very hard and take this really seriously. I hope that the things that they said they would be running on, that they can complete and that they don't give people misinformation and, tell voters that they're going to do certain things that they have no capacity to do. But again, they're it's not a big change from what it was, but we'll see going forward how well, they'd like to participate with us as a whole, whether that be the JCDC or with the HCDO. See going forward how well, they'd like to participate with us as a whole.
Once again, it was a very informative episode with HCDO Chairwoman Amy DeGise, and you can listen to it in its entirety by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/talkingtohudson. These exclusives I'll continue to bring you every single week on Blog Talk Radio. Here's some local stories for your consideration. Let's start off in Jersey City. Thank you to John Hines with Hudson County View for his report on this story. Now, apparently, Our Revolution New Jersey, a local leftist political action committee, I believe, is backing a local resident, Joelle Brooks, in the Jersey City Ward B council race due to a lifetime showing of a commitment to progressive values, again, according to a press release put out by the group this week. Quote, a longtime labor organizer for several major unions, Joelle has a lifetime of commitment to the kind of progressive values that Jersey City, New Jersey need to move our communities forward. Again, that's what the organization's committee member at large Patricia Campos Medina said in a statement. Well, notwithstanding how much I dislike Patricia because she's just another clueless leftist, but let's stay on topic here. Now, to no one's surprise, Joel was an organizer for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign and has spent his professional life advancing working families' issues as an organizer in the labor movement. He is currently a staff member at Health Professionals and Allied Employees Union. So, obviously now he's running a grassroots campaign and has previously pledged to reject any campaign contributions from real estate developers and corporate landlords. Folks, let me just tell you something about Joel Brooks and, of course, that organization, of course, Patricia Campos Medina. These are people, and this is what's really, really alarming to me. Because, for example, Patricia Campos Medina is a fellow Rutgers alumnus who has a PhD like myself, but I've never met someone who's more clueless about biology, about basic math, and about economics. And it seems like Joel sort of fits into this model. Folks, listen, if you're a Bernie supporter, what you tell me every time is, number one, you failed high school biology. Because when you're advocating for these nonsensical, 27 genders argument and everything else that the alphabet army tries to sort of shove down our throats. When you tell me you're a Bernie supporter, it tells me you failed basic math because you can't budget. You don't know how to budget. You think money grows on trees. And third, when you're a Bernie supporter, you're telling me that you failed economics. Clearly, you don't understand how public policy works and budgeting. And haven't you ever wondered, whenever you see these leftist, activists running for any sort of local office and they're Bernie supporters? Folks, have you ever looked at Bernie Sanders? Other than renaming a post office, what has this old man ever done in 40 years in government? That's the only job he's ever had, and he's not really good at it. He's done a great job at fooling people, right, for this amount of time about, well, we need to have fairness and equity. Folks, I've never met a socialist that loves money as much as Bernie Sanders, that guy with 2 homes, a guy with $1 million portfolio. But remember, white people are still the oppressors, right? And that's the type of candidate that Joel Brooks seems to be. One of these Bernie Democrats that, again, are clueless about economics, they're clueless about basic math, and are clueless about biology and other basic subjects. And of course, you're being propped up by these organizations led by Patricia Campos Medina, another clueless leftist who, yeah, she may have a PhD, but it kind of makes me wonder, damn, how easy is it to get a degree like that when someone as clueless can head an organization like this? I'll keep you posted about Joel Brooks' chances, but as we all know, folks, when it comes to Bernie supporters, they can't really muster up much when it comes to campaign season. Now let's move to Hoboken, where Mayor Ravi Bala had a recent kickoff for his re-election campaign in 2021. Once again, a special thank you to John Hines with Hudson County View for his report on the story. Now, Mayor Ravi Bala kicked off his re-election campaign in front of a very large crowd at the Beer Garden in northern Hoboken, of course saying that the best is yet to come with his campaign. As well as Hoboken Democratic Committee Chair Rachel Hodes was also serving as the MC for the evening, and also, of course, perpetual campaigner who eventually won a council seat by the luck of his life, Phil Cohen, also introduced the mayor during that evening. Both Hodes and Cohen went to say, quote, Mayor Bala's leadership is proven, Mayor Bala's leadership is needed, and of course, praising Bala's efforts during the COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, I'm grateful for the leadership we have under Mayor Bala, but also my colleagues at the Board of Ed, my colleagues at the City Council. Through everything in the last year, we've had to work together even when we don't get along, and we don't, joked, of course, Councilwoman at Large Emily Jabor, who was also elected with Bala in 2017. Now, folks, this is what's really interesting about Mayor Bala. This is a guy who obviously was not in the good graces of many of the Democratic establishment going back to the spring of 2018. If you remember, he was supporting Mayor and State Senator Brian Stack in his pursuit of the chairmanship of the HCDO along with Mayor Stephen Fulop. And they sort of ostracized themselves because of what happened during that race. Obviously ostracizing County Executive Tom DeGise, U.S. Representative Albio Sierras, and of course parts of, again, the HCDO establishment. Well, that came and went, and of course, Mayor and State Senator Brian Stack and his political capital is as high as it's ever been. He was able to recover from that. So was Jersey City Mayor Stephen Fulop. But in the end, Mayor Ravi Bala was sort of kind of struggling along. And some people looked at him as a lame duck mayor going into 2019. And of course, once the pandemic hit, we saw that many Hoboken residents applauded his leadership, along with how Governor Murphy enacted COVID restrictions throughout, not just counties, but throughout the state as well. So one of the things that I think helped Mayor Bala was, of course, the pandemic, and certainly the idea that any potential challengers for Ravi Bala's seat for mayor have gone by the wayside. Councilman Mike DeFusco seems to not know what he wants to do, and certainly Councilman Mike Russo also seems to be in the same boat. So what looked like a very doom and gloom campaign for Ravi Bala at the start of 2020 seems to be maybe a runaway second term for him, as he'll go again this November 2nd. So it's July. Who knows if someone steps into the race, but right now it seems like it's too little too late. Mayor Ravi Bala has benefited from sort of like this hiatus from other Hobokenites wanting to challenge him in the Mile Square City. Lastly, let's go to the peninsula city of Bayonne. I want to thank Terry West from the Jersey Journal for her report on this story. So apparently the divide within Bayonne's local government appears to be widening, which won't help with a gap, certainly in its waterfront walkway. Now, the latest bits of evidence were revealed in an audio recording posted to social media this week, and more quietly in a single section of the new state budget. As New Jersey's whopping $46.4 billion budget came together this past week, right before its deadline on June 30th, $500,000 was taken away from Bayonne to complete a portion for its Hackensack River waterfront walkway. Folks, this is the political chickens coming home to roost for Mayor Jimmy Davis. He's pissed off a lot of people, obviously, in the last few months when he decided to disregard Governor Phil Murphy, at the time State Committee Chair John Curry, U.S. Senator Robert Menendez, and of course, Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin, as well as State Senate President Steve Sweeney, when he decided to remove Assembly Majority Whip Nicholas Ciaravalati from the 31st Legislative District ticket coming up on this past primary day. And of course, there's no surprise that once that money was removed from the state budget, I think it was a clear tale sign by the governor and the Democratic establishment in Trenton that Jimmy Davis, and any favor that he might be able to have with the establishment is slowly disappearing. Again, folks, you make decisions, there's consequences to them. And I think this is another example where Jimmy Davis has put a bullseye on himself. And you know what? Even though it's 11 months away, Jimmy Davis has a lot of work to do if he wants to win another term as mayor of Bayonne. If you ask me, it seems like the powerful Democrats in Trenton and even locally in Hudson County might have to make a decision whether or not they want to back him, especially since he's rubbed a lot of Democrats the wrong way with recent decisions that he's made. And obviously, that's not going to end anytime soon. And that's our show for this week. As we approach 4th of July weekend, folks, I can't say enough about how proud I am to be an American as we celebrate the 245th birthday of this great country, as we, again, was able to win independence from King George and the monarchy of England back in 1776. We've gone through a lot in this country. We've gone through a civil war, we've gone through 2 world wars, we've gone through depressions, pandemics, but we've been able to survive it in the end. And I can't say enough about how proud I'll be to celebrate this weekend, certainly in downtown Jersey City at Exchange Place, look at the fireworks, and just being able to be outside. And despite, the harm done on a daily basis by the left in this country, in this state, and even locally, by the social justice clowns, the woke fools, the compassion mongers, liberals and progressives alike, you know what? Despite all that damage they keep doing on a daily basis, this country still remains the greatest place on earth that you ever want to be. So again, happy birthday, America. Happy 245th, and to many, many more. Folks, to check out all of the excellent programming brought to you by the Hudson Media Group, check out their websites, www.hmgtvshows.com and www.livestream.com/hmgtv. Make sure you like the Hudson Media Group on Facebook. Also follow them on Instagram and Twitter, and also check them out on YouTube. Remember, live every Wednesday night, you can check out the 5-time award-winning podcast, Talking the Hudson, by going to www.blogtalkradio.com/talkingthehudson. Check me out on Instagram at Professor Fernando Uribe, also on Twitter at NoFilterUribe. And always remember, if it's unbiased, unfiltered, and unafraid, it's always talking politics right here with the Hudson Media Group. I'm Fernando Uribe. Thank you so much for watching.
Don't forget to catch Fernando's podcast at blogtalkradio.com/talkonthehudson. New episodes available every Wednesday night at 9 p.m.